Nebraska's farmers grew the largest soybean crop in the state's history this year. If the USDA's November estimates hold, they also produced the fourth largest output in the country behind Illinois, Iowa, and Minnesota. The number this season surpasses the previous top set in 2016 and marks the state's fourth record in 4 years. To look ahead to 2018, we recently talked with Nebraska Extension plant pathologist Loren Giesler and asked how growers can use disease histories to choose varieties or alter their selections for next season.
That's probably the number one thing we talk about when we talk about disease management for many of our soil-borne diseases. So sudden death syndrome, brown stem rot, Phytophthora, those are kind of some key ones that we see that you can easily make a selection. So if you've got a few varieties of a grower has certain ones they're looking at and they know they have a history, for example, of sudden death syndrome. If there's somebody that has significant SDS, they've been trying to manage it for a while and they know this. But if you have any history of these and those varieties are close, then that's when I say make that switch over to that variety that has a little better resistance specifically, or even a tolerance score with that. We said quite a bit of Phytophthora this last year, and growers that have had experience with Phytophthora, really key to make sure you have a resistance gene, and then Phytophthora is also rated for tolerance among these varieties, which is different. And so a high tolerance score and any resistance gene has shown in a lot of research to be the best variety selection for those fields.
We'll talk about seed treatments in a second, but when it comes to populations, how can selecting the right population help you manage disease, or at least help you effectively and feasibly manage diseases?
Well, and that's a great question too, because populations, when we look at, for example, we've had white mold now for 4 years in a row. It's amazing, and not amazing for farmers, but amazing as a pathologist to see this happen so frequently, because historically it hasn't been in Nebraska. But with that one, higher populations, specifically row spacing. So closer row spacing can sure make a difference. So we always recommend going to 30-inch rows if they can in that situation. Widening out plant to plant, contact after infection can be high with higher populations. So another consideration with that, with it. And then when we talk populations too, when we get into seed treatments, very commonly recognize that the lower you go in your population, then the higher possibility of return with that seed treatment.
Do you recommend seed treatments for the next growing season?
Well, in general, so there's a couple things. I wish I had a crystal ball and I knew exactly what was going to happen, just like everyone. But if we're planting, earlier, which most farmers are, if we're going into conditions where we get heavy rains afterwards and such, or we have a history of significant stand problems, or we have a history of Phytophthora, or we have a history of sudden death syndrome, for example, those would be areas where we'd sure want to use a seed treatment. And when we look at our research over several years, really it's that seed treatment fungicide that's returning. We see the seed treatment fungicide insecticide combinations that a lot of people use, which can be effective, but that maximum return we typically see with just the fungicide. So that's a point that some people can cut if they want to, but it's so inexpensive most growers just put the whole combo on.
Planting date matters how?
Planting date is the biggest thing, with that push from the standpoint of lengthening your growing season, because when soybeans flower, obviously they flower at each node. So if you're in earlier and you have a couple nodes up on the neighbor, you're going to get more flowers and potentially more yield. It doesn't always translate into yield, but you increase your yield potential. And planting date is not really as important as soil temperature when we look at disease management. So we've had years where you could plant, mid-April, end of April, early May, and you've got 60-degree soil temps with the stochasticity we've seen. And then we've had those that we've had, 40, 48 degrees. So that's the biggest effect when I see an effect on seedling diseases.
Where can growers find more resources during the season?
A lot of great resources available. So we've got resources on the Crop Watch website. There as well. Then the other resource that is really nice is the Crop Protection Network, and that's cropprotectionnetwork.org. That is a group of us that are extension pathologists from across the north central region. They get together and put publications that are really nice, high quality pieces that bring in a lot of different expertise and aspects. So winter's a great time to learn more, do some reading. I encourage them to visit that site as well.